I stitched his name into my chest, so no one else could see it. He was my war secret, and my quiet salvation. But now, the silence has gotten too heavy. My name is Eleanor May Holloway. I'm 78, though it feels like I carry more years than that inside me. I live alone in an old trailer parked behind an abandoned gas station somewhere along the roads of Tennessee. One of those stops no one pulls into anymore, not even to ask for directions. Most folks see me as a tired old lady living off scraps of memory. But nobody knows I was a nurse in a prisoner of war camp. And even fewer know that, in that camp, I loved a man I was never free to touch. A man who still lives between the seams of my apron and the silence in my voice. Come sit with me, sweetheart. This story isn't easy to tell, but I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Take a deep breath. Listen with your heart, not with hurry, because some things can only be understood in silence and with an open soul. And if at any moment these words touch some small corner of you, if you've ever loved in silence or held something in for far too long, then subscribe to this channel so that memories like this one don't die alone, like this video, and if you can, share it with someone who's carrying grief where no one else can see it. Because today, I don't just want to remember. I want someone to hear me. Sometimes when the sun hasn't yet reached my kitchen and the world outside feels asleep, I grab my old cotton rag and dip it in white vinegar. That strong kind, the one that almost knocks the wind out of you. I wipe the counter with slow, almost ritual movements. And that's when it happens. Memory walks in, uninvited, no knock on the door, like smoke sneaking through a poorly sealed window. First comes the smell, then the camp, then him. I don't know why, but vinegar has this way of dragging me back to those days. Maybe because it was what we used for everything. Cleaning wounds, scrubbing linens, trying to tame the rot of fear. But it was more than that. Vinegar marked the end of one shift and the start of another. It stuck to our hands even after we washed. It seeped into the mildewed walls of that place they called a clinic, but felt more like a warehouse of orderly pain. That smell was a memory that never asked to be remembered. I must have been about 23, 24 years old. Young enough to believe you could fix the world just by caring. Old enough to have already learned how to stay quiet. My uniform was loose, but fear clung tight inside. The camp's hallways were damp and stifling. But the silence hurt worse. A silence that screamed, that hung on walls, on sheets, in eyes. And that silence, darling, that silence taught me how to hear what no one said. In those early days, I moved in complete silence. I was black, a woman, American, and still invisible. I walked among wounded men, screams no one translated, and orders that came crashing down like thunder. I did what I was told. Cleaned cuts, changed dressings, recorded temperatures. But inside I was just raw flesh trying not to feel. Until he showed up. Or better yet, until he stayed. But that, I'll tell you later. Right now, I want you to understand the setting. Because this emotional story that's lodged inside me didn't begin in a field of flowers or a ballroom. It was born where vinegar burns the nose, and loneliness eats away at your chest, in silence. Born among muddy boots, torn flags, and prayers no one said anymore. The camp had rules, plenty of them. Nurses weren't allowed to interact with prisoners beyond what was necessary. Our touch had to be clinical, almost surgical, soulless, as if love had no place between syringes and gauze. But hear me clearly. Love, that unruly thing, doesn't care about rules. It leaks through the cracks of what's forbidden, and that's how it started leaking. Slowly, through the cracks. I've always believed the heart keeps memories the mouth will never speak. And mine, well, mine started remembering that specific corridor where the men from Block B were kept, the Germans. That's where the vinegar burned the most, not because the floors were dirtier, but because I lingered there longer. I got lost in the footsteps, in the eyes, in the absences, and one day, somewhere between one bucket and the next, I felt it, felt my heart beating to a new rhythm. It wasn't love, not yet. It was recognition, a flicker of something that didn't yet have a name, but already burned in silence. No one ever asked what went on in my head during those days, and I never told anyone. Because love stories born in war don't fit in reports or on medals. They fit here between these stained fingers and this counter that still shines with cheap vinegar. Because that's where it all began. Or rather, where it all came back. Every time I wipe this cloth across here, I go back. And I swear to you, if you listen closely, you can still hear the creak of iron beds, the stomp of boots on concrete, and his breath. What's funny is, back then no one dared say the word love out loud, especially not in a place like that. But to me, it was the most emotional story I ever lived. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was forbidden. And still, it saved me. Forbidden love that blooms in the dark is like wild weed. It grows where they say nothing should. And it grows strong. For years I kept it quiet. So quiet I started thinking I'd made it all up. That maybe it was just a dream. But then, I'd wipe the counter. And there it was. The smell of vinegar. The silence in the hall. And his eyes, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Like I wasn't just some invisible nurse. Like I was someone still capable of loving. And look, maybe you've never heard a woman like me share something like this. Because we, the forgotten heroines, were trained to endure, not to confess. Taught to care, but not to want. To clean wounds, but never let anyone touch ours. But now, at this stage in life, when the night falls faster and my body can't run anymore, I chose to whisper what I once swallowed. Because sometimes a secret kept for too long starts to leak out the edges. And mine started with vinegar. And now, in this very moment that you're hearing me, know that this silence right here is different. It doesn't weigh. It exhales. Because someone is finally listening. And that changes everything. His name was Elias. I never wrote that name in any notebook, any calendar, any diary. Never stitched those letters into the edges of my memory, like the other girls did with the names of the soldiers who flirted with them. Because Elias wasn't meant to be written. He was meant to be felt. Like a whisper kept in the dark. Like one of those caged birds that only sings at night. A name too sacred to become a draft. And yet, he lives inside me with a clarity that still startles me. As if it had been tattooed on the inside of my skin. Elias. Just like that. No last name. No ID number. No family waiting on the outside. Just Elias. Said the way only he could say it. With that accent that blended harsh consonants, with a soft breath at the end. Like even his own name was tired of existing. The first time I heard it was on the intake form. A file with no photo. Just a cell number and the severity of his wounds. Nothing unusual. Men like that arrived every day. Broken inside and out. But something made me pause at that file. Maybe it was the silence between the lines, as if the paper, no matter how filled out, told me nothing. That's how I learned the real names don't come typed in ink. They come in the way someone holds your gaze. When I first saw Elias, he was slumped over, head tilted, eyes half closed. He looked half dead, But it wasn't his body that was tired. It was his soul. The kind of exhaustion I'd only seen from a distance. But in Elias, it looked like it had moved in and unpacked. He wasn't old, but not exactly young either. Not handsome by the world's loud standards, but there was a beauty in him I didn't understand until much later. The beauty of someone who survives without letting the war steal the last thread of tenderness. Most prisoners avoided eye contact, some out of shame, others out of pride. But not Elias. He looked straight at me, and quiet. A kind of silence that seemed to respect my place, my fatigue, my story. Even though he knew nothing about me. He looked at me like a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to hide. And in that silence, he told me what no one else ever did. "I see you. And listen, my dear. There is something deeply dangerous about being seen in a place like that. Because forbidden love doesn't begin with stolen kisses or moonlight promises. It starts with a glance the world doesn't allow. It starts when two silences recognize each other. And that's exactly what happened with me and Elias. Me, a black nurse in a country that barely saw me as a citizen. Him, a man imprisoned by the uniform he wore. Even if, deep down, he'd probably ripped it off 1,000 times already. I never really knew what his role had been before he was captured. War doesn't care to explain who's who. It just labels. It just separates. And me, I didn't dare ask. Because a part of me didn't want to know if he'd done something unforgivable. I just wanted to keep him as he was in that moment. Tired, wounded, and heartbreakingly human. A man who whispered thank you and gave me his eyes in return. You might think it strange, but I believe that's what truly got me. The way he looked at the other men. Not with disdain, not with arrogance, but with pity, with mercy, as if despite everything, he still believed those lives, all of them, had worth. And that, my dear, that was rare. Because in wartime, even eyes become weapons. But his were still a shelter. It's hard to explain, but the more time passed, the more that name, Elias, became a flicker of light in the darkness of my days. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was dangerous, impossible. But every time someone called out his number, and he didn't respond, I clenched my teeth. Because I knew. I knew that number wasn't him. Elias was more than a file, more than a uniform, more than any judgment placed on him. And maybe that's why I never wrote his name down, because the world didn't deserve to speak it out loud, because paper wouldn't know how to hold it, because I was scared that writing it would make it more real, and at the same time more distant. Some names we only confess into a pillow, and others we whisper only to God, with shame and hope. Elias was both, and more. He was the only name that pulsed inside me without ever being spoken. And when I think about it now, at 78, leaning against this window as the vinegar hangs in the air, I realize that love is this, guarding a name like it's a prayer, even if it never becomes a full one. There were many men who passed through my life. Some touched my body. Others gave me their last names. But only Elias touched me without laying a hand. And that touch, no one ever took it from me. And sometimes, only sometimes, I wonder if he remembers my name. If it still echoes somewhere, hidden in a quiet corner of his memory. Because I remember the sound of his voice saying, "Miss Eleanor," in that crooked, almost shy way. Like naming me was also setting me free from what the world said I was. And for a few seconds it worked. I stopped being the invisible nurse. I became a woman. I became someone. And that, my love, that was never written anywhere. But I felt it. And now, only now, I've decided to tell it. It was a cloudy morning in March. One of those days that starts gray and stays that way till the end, like even the sky is grieving. I remember because the clouds were so low, they looked like they wanted to hide the whole camp, as if even God had turned his face away that morning. The infirmary faucet wasn't helping. It groaned before spitting out lukewarm, yellowish water that took forever to fill the metal basin. It was always like that. Every act of care began with waiting. And that morning, between bottles of ether and stained sheets, I was told one of the men from Block B had been hurt during a nighttime transfer. A kind of notice I'd heard 1,000 times. But that day, that name hit different. Elias. I rushed to the corner of the infirmary with the basin half full and my heart strangely overflowing. He was slumped on his side, breathing like air came with a price. His prison shirt torn, dark blood streaking across his ribs. And his eyes, always his eyes, were far away, lost in a memory that probably hurt more than the wound itself. He didn't scream, didn't groan, just looked at me, like he already knew I'd come. I knelt beside him, towel folded on my lap. I dipped it into the basin, and for a moment I hesitated. It was the first time I touched him like that. Not with gloves or tweezers, but with a damp cloth, and my bare hand beneath it. I remember thinking, this is wrong. But what came next was even more unsettling. I couldn't stop. The cloth found the wound, and I felt the warmth of his blood mingled with the heat of his skin. He closed his eyes, not from pain, but from relief. A breath escaped his cracked lips, like that warm water was the first human kindness he'd felt in weeks. And right then, kneeling on that stained cement floor, something inside me broke. Or maybe something finally opened, because my hand wasn't just a hand anymore. It was a bridge, a confession. Elias said nothing. Neither did I. But a whole world moved between that gesture and the silence. A world the camp couldn't contain. Because what lived there, between a cloth and an open wound, was a war-born love that didn't yet know it was love. But it already was, already there, already pulsing. I washed that blood like someone asking forgiveness for not arriving sooner. Like someone trying, with water and tenderness, to erase what violence had written. And at the same time, I knew. This wasn't healing. It was memory. I was writing something with my fingers that history would never bother to record. And still, I went on. Because in that touch there was something no military protocol could control. Gentleness. His blood was thick, warm, like it was still fighting to stay alive. And it tore me up inside, because in that moment, Elias wasn't a prisoner. He was a man, a wounded man. A man on the other side of the fence, yes, but who felt the same pain, gave off the same human sigh as any other. And it was there, between gauze and numbness, that I started to understand the weight of the sin they called loving the enemy, and loving anyway. After cleaning the wound, I wrapped it gently. No rush. My fingers moved across the bandage like someone writing a prayer without words. And when I was done, he opened his eyes, looked at me deeply like my soul had been left sitting there on the sheet, and he said only, "Danke." I almost cried, not because of the thank you, but because I understood, deep down, that this might have been the first time someone gave his body back to him, without disdain. Later that same day, I was called to the officer's office. "You took too long at that cot," he said. I told him the wound was large, that the man was weak, that he needed attention. But we both knew. It wasn't the time that bothered him. It was the gesture. It was the touch. It was the suspicion that, between bloody cloths, something human might still exist. And that was the real threat. That night I went back to the kitchen and scrubbed the towel with harsh soap. I scrubbed hard, but the blood clung on. It wanted to stay. It wanted to say, "This happened." I hung it on the line, but I looked back twice before walking away, as if that cloth knew too much. And even now, my daughter, whenever I soak dish rags or let a towel sit in suds, I remember him. The blood, the warmth, the silence filled with confession. And I wonder, does he remember too? Does he, somewhere, still feel the touch of that morning? Or did we, like so many forbidden loves, just become a blur? Too beautiful to be remembered, too painful to forget. Because there are some stories too emotional to be spoken aloud. And this one stayed trapped in my fingers for years. But now that my body is tired of hiding, and my heart's ready to open the door, I'm telling it, slowly, like someone unfolding an old sheet, and right here, in this fold. His blood still lingers. The first thing you see when you think of a prisoner camp is the fence. Tall, rough, cold, sometimes double, sometimes triple, lined with twisted wire, sharp edges, and the arrogance of something that splits the world in two and still thinks only one side is right. But the cruelest fence wasn't made of metal or electricity. The real fence was in the eyes. He was light, from his skin to his iris, like the sun on his side of the world had left traces on everything. His eyes were such a pale blue, they looked like glass. Not new glass, no. Cracked glass, fragile and dangerous, like something that could cut or reveal. And me, I was dark like wet soil, the kind that's already buried so much, but stays steady anyway. My eyes were deep brown, almost black, like they were holding every question I'd never dared to speak. And that's exactly where the world decided we were on opposite sides of the fence. The world, with its filthy rules and hand-me-down truths, looked at me, a black American woman, and gave me a badge. Nurse, subordinate, trusted, they'd say, like that was some kind of praise. And it looked at him, a prisoner of war with German blood, and reduced him to a number, a label, an enemy. But nobody thought that on both sides of the wire there were people. And worse, no one imagined two of those people might actually see each other. No fences, no fear, no manual. Sometimes I'd find myself watching him sleep, silently, from a distance. That slow breath, that chest rising without effort. Elias was made of deep silence, and I, of hidden questions. And together, we were an emotional story no one would ever write because it was too ugly for history books, and too beautiful not to exist. There was one day he saw me crying. I thought I was alone, tucked away in the supply room, my eyes stinging after a radio report. Another ship sunk. More dead. More soldiers who wouldn't make it home. I was crying softly, like even my grief needed permission. Then I felt him. He didn't say a word. Just placed a handkerchief on the table and walked away. A linen handkerchief stained with blood but carefully folded. That was all. And it was everything. That's how our forbidden love lived. No touch, no words, just gestures, small, persistent, dangerous. Because in that place, even kindness raised suspicion, and a glance held too long could cost someone their life. But still, we looked, because some fences the eyes cross without asking. And listen, I'm not here to romanticize war. Far from it. That whole place was a frozen hell. But what existed between me and Elias was a miracle in the ashes, like a tiny flower pushing through stone, like a sliver of light sneaking in through a forgotten crack. And to this day, I ask myself, does love really need to be on the right side of war to be real? Because since I was a girl, they taught me some things don't mix. That a black woman should know her place. That we can serve, but not feel. That we care for others, but don't get to dream. Then came the war, and it unraveled everything, and handed me a man with broken eyes who dared to see me, who protected me, who thanked me, who smiled at me with tenderness, even when he could barely breathe. You tell me, isn't that love? Isn't that a miracle? For months I lived in that duality. One side of the fence was obedience, the other, impossibility, and in the middle, me, with my tired body, my unruly heart, and a soul that no longer knew where it was allowed to rest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip off my apron. I wanted to tear down that fence with my bare hands and shout so the whole world would hear. What if love doesn't have a right side in war? What if love is exactly that, the impossible bridge between two silences? But I stayed quiet, because a black woman in those days didn't get to scream. And if she did, no one listened. Now, looking out my kitchen window, this scarf tied in my hair, my knees aching, I think about the fences still out there. They're no longer made of barbed wire, but of indifference, of fear, of prejudice. They're invisible now, but sharper than ever. And I wonder, are there still wartime loves trying to survive between them? Because I was one of the forgotten heroines, the kind who care, who heal, who hold the hand of the bleeding, but whose stories never get told. And now, telling this one, I feel like I'm finally climbing the fence of silence. And listen, sweetheart, there's still so much you don't know. It was on a quiet night, one of those nights where even the camp rats seemed to be dozing off. The silence was thick and heavy, like a damp blanket thrown over the whole world. I was reorganizing supplies in the Block B storage cabinet, like I always did at the end of my shift. First the glass bottles, then the medicine, and lastly, the gauze and cotton pads. Everything lined up meticulously, just the way we were told. Because in a war, order is the last illusion we try to cling to. But that night, tucked between two boxes of cotton, there was something that didn't belong. A slip of paper, folded, small, yellowed at the edges, like it had been hidden and unhidden many times before. For a second, I thought it was just another misplaced inventory list, or maybe a military note. But when I unfolded it, my hands cold from fear and curiosity, I saw just 3 words written in almost faded ink. Danke, für dich. No signature, no date. But I knew. In the way only someone who's carried a forbidden love can know. It was from him, from Elias. I didn't need a translation, though I had one for better or worse. It meant, thank you, for you. That simple. But in that camp where words were rationed, those 3 hit me like a sweet thunderclap, like an improvised shelter in the middle of a storm, like a voice whispering when the whole world tells you to stay silent. I stood there for minutes, that note in my hand, my chest tight, my gaze lost in the shadow cast by the hanging lantern, and something inside me shook, because that note wasn't just a thank you. It was a risk, a calling, a confession. It was Elias crossing, in silence, the fence between us. It was him saying that whatever lived between us wasn't just in my head, that he felt it too, that he knew. And me, I trembled. Because wartime love is like that, darling. You tremble over small words. You recognize your own voice in someone else's silence. You accept that what's lived between cracked walls can be more real than all the loud loves that parade in daylight. I tucked the note into the inner pocket of my apron right there. And later, when I crept back into the barracks, careful, soft-footed, I unsticked the lining of my canvas bag and hid it inside, between the seam and the fabric, a hiding place even time wouldn't find. Because that forbidden love, that emotional story no one ever knew, it deserved a place of its own, a corner untouched by fear or forgetting. I never told a soul, not when the war ended, not when I got home, not even when someone asked me, years later, if I'd ever fallen for someone during those days. I always said, no, there was too much work, no time for things like that. Lie. There was time, soul time, eye time, gesture time. There just wasn't permission. And look, it's not about shame. I was never ashamed of loving Elias. What I had, and maybe still have, is a strange kind of protectiveness, a fear that if I said it out loud, the love would lose its glow, would be misunderstood, mocked, twisted, because people don't always know how to recognize something pure when it grows in the dirt of war. You understand what I'm saying? That note, it stayed with me for decades. It moved with me through houses, losses, weddings, widowhood, motherhood. I found it again in different seasons of life. When I was too sad, it reminded me I was seen. When I was alone, it reminded me I was chosen. When I was exhausted, it reminded me there was still tenderness stored somewhere deep. And that, my dear, that's more than most ever have. In that camp, where everything was pain or orders, that note was a form of resistance, a seed of humanity pushed into concrete. Proof that even in a place of cages and commands, two human beings had truly seen one another. And if you asked me today why I kept it for so long, I'd answer with a cracked voice. Because some secrets are more loyal than wedding vows. And this was my most loyal companion. I never showed it to my husband. He was good, yes, a decent man. But he wasn't Elias. And I knew the heart has rooms even the right loves can't enter. And that's okay. We learn to live with that. We learn to respect the spaces of the memories that can't be spoken aloud. And now that my body no longer runs, my eyes can't read the fine print, and my voice falters at times, I decided to pull that note from its hiding place. I looked at it the other day like someone stares at a childhood photo, and I thought, maybe it's time to tell it, just once, just to someone who can listen with the care this story deserves. Because wartime love, my daughter, isn't like the others. It doesn't ask for flowers. It's not built through dinners or Sundays at the park. It's born in the middle of pain. It survives through glances. And it grows where no one thinks love can grow. And if it's lucky, it becomes a memory. If not, it becomes a ghost. And ours, well, ours still breathes. Fire rained from the sky that night, and no, that's not a metaphor. It was real fire, falling from above with the fury of someone trying to erase every trace of humanity. The rumble started slow, like a threat crawling through the dark, and then it all came at once, like thunder, like punishment, like the end. I woke to the windows rattling, the floor groaning, and the sharp smell of gunpowder slicing through the air like a blade. That night, the war screamed too loud to ignore. I grabbed the lantern, my eyes still foggy, my heart stumbling inside my chest. My fingers could barely strike the match. The nurse on the other shift was gone. Maybe rushing toward Ward A, maybe buried under rubble. Smoke was creeping in. And outside, screams. Cries of pain, panic, goodbyes, screams in languages I didn't understand. But one voice cut through me like it had known my name before I did. Eleanor! Yes, with an accent, with fear, with urgency. It was him, Elias. I ran, without thinking, without measuring, without remembering. The fences, the ranks, the punishments. I ran like a woman, not a nurse, like a soul chasing another soul. The smoke had already taken over the halls by the time I reached Block B. Men were coughing, crawling, groaning between broken beds and fallen beams. One was calling for water, another for his mother. But my body searched for one sound, one voice, one sign. And then I saw him. He was there, standing, barely, bent at the waist, blood running down his arm, eyes glazed over. When he saw me, he ran, straight toward me, like I was the only living thing left in a crumbling world. He grabbed me by the waist, yanked me back against the least exposed wall, and put himself in front of me. His body shielded mine, as if his own chest could hold back the burning sky. And in that moment, I knew. I knew with my heart, my skin, my bones. This was love. No metaphor, no maybe, no what if. It was war-born love, yes, but love. The kind that shows itself when death is close, because it knows there may be no time to say it later. The kind that gives everything, even when it knows there may be no morning. Outside, the bombing roared like hell, but inside that second, the world went quiet, and there was only him, protecting me, holding me, calling me by name, not by my title, not by my role, by the woman under the rules, under the orders, under the war. I remember the heat of his body pressed against mine, his heavy breath, the tremble in his fingers, and the way he squeezed my shoulders before stepping back, like he was saying, "Go, save yourself." But I didn't go. I stayed, right there, caring for him, right away, reckless, mad. The wound on his arm was deep, but not fatal. What hurt more was what couldn't be seen. And maybe that's why he looked at me like that. Like he was saying, "I know we won't survive this, but if I have to die, let it be here, with you." We stayed there for minutes. Or was it seconds? Time plays tricks when it's about to end. He said something in German, through clenched teeth. But I didn't understand. I just nodded. And then he smiled. A tired smile, but full. Like he'd finally understood everything words could never say. The bombing stopped suddenly. Just like it started. Like God had changed his mind. Like the world, out of mercy, gave us a pause. And there we were, still breathing. Then came the medics. Then came the others. Then came the separation. But that moment stayed, etched in my body, stitched into my memory, burned in places time can't erase. And to this day, when the night gets too stormy, when lightning flashes across the sky and thunder rolls deep, I go back. I see him again, shielding me, saying my name with his chest wide open, choosing to save me, even when no one else saw me. And I wonder, how many times in life does someone do that for us? How many times does someone stand between you and a collapsing world? How many times do we love and are loved, even when time won't let us say it twice? That was the night the world exploded. But it was also the night the world fell silent, just for me, just for us. And even if no one saw it, even if no one ever asks, I know. I lived it. And it doesn't matter how many years go by, that night still burns in me. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow never came for us. It happened the following week. Everything seemed calmer on the outside, but inside me, the chaos still whispered. The rubble from the bombing had been cleared. The beds were rebuilt. The halls scrubbed with so much vinegar the air itself burned. But no amount of cleaning erases what was felt in the dark. And what I'd felt that night with Elias wouldn't leave me, not even if I set it on fire. The news came dry, the way all orders do when they want to sound neutral. Block B will be transferred, all men, no exceptions. I remember the captain's voice clearly, slow, steady, like he was reading a recipe, not signing off on the most painful separation of my life. I was standing there, my lab coat faintly stained with dried blood, my hands hidden behind my back, and my heart, well, my heart was in pieces, trying not to make a sound. "Elias too?" I asked, quietly, almost a whisper that slipped out before I could swallow it back. The captain lifted his eyes from the paper and looked at me like I'd spit poison. A thick silence settled between us. Then he pressed his lips together and said, "You looking to get yourself contaminated, nurse?" The words just hung there. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. That sentence was accusation, threat, and judgment all at once. And me. I didn't deny it, because in that moment I did want it. Every letter, every consequence. I wanted to be contaminated by that forbidden love. I wanted to carry Elias in me, even if only as a memory, because there was no going back anymore. Still, I tried. I tried to argue. Said he still had a fever. Said the wound on his arm hadn't closed properly. Said he needed more rest. I used every bit of training I had, every ounce of caution, every last thread of hope. The captain smiled, a crooked, dry smile, the kind that knows it's already made up its mind. And all he said was, "Enemies don't rest, nurse. They obey." And right then, I understood. What Elias and I were living, it wasn't just forbidden. It was dangerous. Because it wasn't just affection, it was insubordination. It was defying the hierarchy of hate. It was loving where only fear was allowed. And that, my daughter, that's scarier than guns. That night, I went to Elias's makeshift cell. I had to see him with my own eyes, had to say something, anything. But when I got there, he already knew. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like someone being ripped out by the roots. The bandage was still on his arm, but he stood tall, firm, like someone who's decided he won't beg, like someone who's leaving without apologizing for having loved. We stared at each other in silence, and that silence, that hurt the most. I wanted to hold him, scream, run across the field with him, escape that war, build a world with another name. But I just stood there, frozen, my whole body begging to move, and my soul holding back the tears. He reached for my wrist, gently, looked at me again, like he was begging me not to forget. And I swear on all that's holy. In that instant, I heard the sound of the world splitting in two. He was taken the next morning, no ceremony, no farewell. I stood behind the infirmary curtain, watching the trucks drive away. Dust rose, tires crunched over gravel. And my heart was trapped in the slow crawl of a truck that wasn't just taking a patient. It was taking a part of me that would never come back whole. And the worst part, sweetheart, the worst wasn't the loss. It was the silence after. No one mentioned his name again. Not the guards, not the other prisoners. It was like Elias had been erased, like he never existed, like that emotional story, that wartime love born between bandages and glances, had been swept away with the courtyard dust. But inside me, he remained. I heard him in the wind. I saw him in the curve of the bed shadows. I felt him in the warmth of the hand that had once held my wrist. And in the pocket of my apron, the note stayed stitched in place. Because some things, not even the highest orders can take away. And that forbidden love was one of them. I kept working, kept caring, kept quiet. Because that's what was expected of a black woman in a white man's war, in a broken country. But every night when I turned off the infirmary light, I whispered his name. Elias. Just low enough so no one would hear. just loud enough so I wouldn't forget. And you see, forgetting was never an option. We don't have a single photo together. No picture, no portrait, no worn piece of paper with rounded corners that I can hold in my hands and say, "Here." We were real. And that, my daughter, hurts more than any distance, because everyone keeps something. A visible memory, a scrap of paper, a signature. Me? I don't. All I have are memories no one else can see. And sometimes I wonder, is that why people doubt it was love? But I remember. I remember with a sharpness that scares me sometimes. I remember the light that morning they took him, filtering through the stained tarp of the infirmary, with that yellowish tone of fading hope. I remember him sitting on the cot, feet on the floor, hands folded in his lap. His eyes. Oh, his eyes. They didn't look at me with anger or sadness, but something worse. With a farewell already accepted, like someone who knows they're going to lose and chooses to look one last time anyway. I smiled. On the outside, yes, because that's what was expected of me. Steadiness, restraint, professionalism. But inside, my soul sobbed like a child left alone in the dark, screamed without a voice, begged for a kind of time that never belonged to us. If I'd had a camera, I would have taken a picture of him right there, sitting, shoulders slightly slouched, carrying not just pain, but the weight of a world that had already collapsed. The apron folded in the corner, the freshly changed bandages, and the heavy sky outside as if it were mourning with us. I would have taken that photo just for me, just to remember that, for one moment, someone truly saw me. But I didn't have a camera, and even if I had, I couldn't have used it. The rules forbade it. The officer's eyes were everywhere. And even if no one saw, I knew that image, if it ever existed, would be dangerous. Because forbidden love isn't meant to be captured. It doesn't fit in a frame. It doesn't sit politely on a shelf. So I kept the scene right here, in my memory, like a silent photograph, taken with the eyes of the soul. And sometimes when the world is quiet, when night falls slowly, and the noise of the street fades, I close my eyes, and I see it all. The scene, Elias, the moment, still warm, still alive. I even remember what he said, or tried to say. Something in German, low and tangled, like it had been torn from the deepest part of his chest. I never understood the words. I never needed to, because some things are understood with the body, with what vibrates between one breath and the next. And in that moment I knew. I knew it was goodbye. A real goodbye, the kind you don't get twice. Sometimes, during the longest nights, I try to reconstruct that sound, that tone, that final phrase. I find myself staring out the kitchen window, wondering what he meant. Was he forgiving me? Was he thanking me? Was he telling me he loved me? Or was he just saying farewell, like someone who knows that loving also means letting go? Years later, when I got married, my husband asked for a photo of me from the war. "I want to see what you looked like during that tough time," he said sweetly. I looked for one. I gave him one where I was serious, in uniform, standing in front of a medical tent. Alone. Small smile. Sun behind me. But my thoughts, the day that photo was taken, were far away, with Elias. And I kept that photo with him inside it. Yes, him. Even though he wasn't in the frame. Because some presences don't need faces. They sit beside us, even in the invisible. And that's how Elias always was. With me, without image. Present, without proof. And you know, sweetheart, the world puts so much value on things you can touch. A photograph, a ring, a signed note. But I learned, with him, that what matters most is what you can't see. What you keep in the dark, what you carry without showing, what stays real, even without a record. That's why this emotional story still lives. Because even without a photo, even without a concrete keepsake, it beats. It survives. It still wakes me up in the middle of the night with his name caught in my throat. And every time I open that drawer where I keep the old kitchen towels and find, tucked in the back, that stained apron, I feel like that image was never lost. Because true wartime love doesn't need a photograph. It lives in what was never said. And me? I never forgot the light from that morning. I started this letter more times than I can count. On loose sheets, in hardcover notebooks, on diner napkins, even once on the edge of a medical chart. It always began the same way. Dear Elias. But then my hand would freeze, my chest would tighten, and I'd fold the paper slowly, like someone closing a morning before it even begins. Because how do you write to someone who never knew they were the center of your longing? How do you tell the world that a black woman, raised in the forgotten outskirts of Pittsburgh, sent to fight in a war that wasn't even hers, dared to love a man from the wrong side of the trench? How do you explain that it wasn't betrayal? It was redemption? That, in the middle of the dirtiest war our history ever wrote, the one thing that kept me standing was a forbidden love no one knew how to name? I tried. I swear I tried. I tried to tell it. Tried to put on paper everything he meant, everything I never said, everything that got stuck in my throat the day the trucks took him away. But the words, they kept slipping away, because there was no way to write it down without reopening the wound, without bleeding all over again. And I was already bleeding too much on the inside. I kept every attempt. Some are still here tucked at the bottom of my sewing box, folded between old buttons and scraps of fabric. Others I tore up, some I burned, like someone trying to bury what time refuses to erase. But even without an envelope, without a stamp, the letter kept living inside me. And the strangest part, my daughter, is that the letter was never for him. It was for me. It was me trying to convince myself that what I lived was real, that this emotional story no one witnessed actually happened, that this wartime love, hidden between gauze, glances, and silence, wasn't just the invention of a tired young girl. It was real. I felt it. I lived it. And I still carry it. Writing it down meant admitting it. And back then, admitting it was far too dangerous. Because the world could barely accept that I, as a black woman, had the right to dream, let alone to love. And worse, to love a white man, a German, a prisoner, a man everyone said that stood for everything I was supposed to hate. But Elias wasn't a symbol. He was human. He was light eyes that saw me. He was wounded hands that offered me peace. He was a whisper in the middle of chaos that said, "You exist. I see you." And that's worth more than any record. Sometimes on the longest nights, the kind when sleep won't come and the wind howls like a lost soldier, I catch myself wondering, what if I had sent it? Would he have read it? Would he have recognized my handwriting, the tone of my voice hidden between the lines? Would he have kept it? Like I kept his note? But then I remember, Elias never knew my address, not even my full name, not my married last name. Because in war, no one is whole. We live in fragments. And what lived between us was only ours. No witnesses, no evidence, no record, just faith. Now, with 78 years behind me, and a soul that's already turned many corners of time, I still think about that letter. I still write pieces of it in my head, like someone whispering to themselves in the dark. And sometimes while I stir the old pots in the kitchen or hang a towel out to dry, I find myself silently reciting, "Dear Elias, you were what saved me from bitterness, from hardening, from being forgotten. I loved you in a time when no one else did. And that was enough. But I never sent it. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of protection. Maybe out of wisdom. Or maybe because some stories only make sense when kept carefully. And once told, a little of the magic fades. Still, I'm here now telling you, for the first time in a voice almost out loud, that he existed, that this forbidden love was more faithful than many that made it to the altar, and that this letter, though never mailed, was written inside me, word by word, year by year. And if by some miracle somewhere in this world, Elias is still alive, let him know that even without a stamp, my heart was always the sender. Today, at 78 years old, I still keep my old nurse's apron. It's not hanging with the kitchen towels, not folded neatly in the guest linen drawer. It's tucked inside a reinforced cardboard box, wrapped in unbleached cotton cloth, like an old baby or a fragile memory that can't be washed anymore. I've kept it carefully, year after year, move after move, as if I always knew that someday someone would need to hear what's stitched inside it. It's an ordinary apron, you know. Simple cut, wide straps, thick cotton fabric worn soft with time. Stains that even the best soap back then couldn't remove. A little blood, a bit of ether, and a whole lot of me. But what no one knows, what no one's ever seen, is what I stitched into its lining with fine thread and trembling hands on a quiet night at the end of the war. There, right in the center of the inner chest, the note is hidden. That note, the same one. Folded, dry, holding the 3 words that changed everything. Danke, für dich. Thank you, for you. I sewed it in with bluish-gray thread, almost the color of Elias's uniform. And I did it at a time when my heart was still bleeding from his departure. But my hands insisted on preserving what was left, because that forbidden love needed shelter, and my apron was the only safe place in the world. I wore that apron long after the war ended, in small clinics on community visits, even at home while cooking Sunday dinners. No one ever noticed the thicker lining, the different thread, the way I hung it up so gently, too carefully. No one ever asked. And that's exactly why it survived. Hidden, silent, faithful. Sometimes when I wore it, I felt accompanied, as if Elias walked with me, down neighborhood sidewalks, up hospital staircases, through the corridors of silence. And it was like that little slip of paper sewn to my chest was a compass, a quiet reminder that for a brief moment someone saw me whole. But years passed, and with them came new stories, other names, other hurts. Life moved on, the way life does, even when no one asks if you're ready. I married, I raised children, I worked, and the apron stayed. Sometimes forgotten, sometimes remembered too much. Today it's old, like me. The fabric has yellowed, the thread has faded. But the note is still there, intact, as if time respected that little secret, as if even in the rush of the world it was protected by something greater than my stitches. By love, maybe. Or by a faith only forgotten heroines know. And you know, my daughter, I always thought that note was just mine, a private relic. But now, with life saying its goodbyes around the edges, I think differently. I think maybe it was never just mine. Maybe it survived this long because it needed to be shared, because at some point, it had to find a witness. And that's why I'm here today, with my tired knees and blurred eyes, telling you, only you, that yes, I loved a man in a prisoner of war camp, and that man saw me. And I saw him. And it was real. There's no record, no photo, no stamped paper. But there's this apron, this hidden seam, this little note with 3 words that say more than all the letters I never wrote. And there's this moment, right now, when someone finally listens to me with the care my story deserves. So if you ever come across a stained piece of cloth with crooked stitching near the chest and a folded piece of paper sewn inside, know that it's more than fabric. It's a life. It's a love that couldn't live in the light, but bloomed in the shadows. And even if no one else believes, even if this emotional story never makes it to any book, I ask you, don't let it die in silence. You see, time has a strange way of erasing things halfway. It carries off names, faces, scents, but it leaves behind what weighs most, the things we never said. I've spent my whole life stitching silence where words should have been, and only now, so late, do I realize. Silence has a sound too, and it's the sound of what still hurts. These days, my routine is simple. I make my coffee slowly, look out the trailer window, and listen to the birds that still haven't learned to rush. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I just remember. I have 2 grandkids who call me every now and then, and 1 old box that I guard like an altar. Inside it, my apron. And inside the apron, the note. Elias still lives there. And maybe that's why I've never felt completely alone. Thank you for listening. Truly. You have no idea what that means to someone who spent a lifetime keeping secrets in her chest. If these words touched you, even a little, stay a while. Subscribe to this channel, like this story. And if you can, share it with someone who carries their own war in silence. Sometimes all we really need is a quiet ear, and someone who doesn't look away. Thank you, sweetheart, from the bottom of my heart. And may you never have to stitch love into hiding.